Welcome to Miss Scarlett. Subscribe and don't miss out on Patreon. Have fun! In the fading light of the afternoon, Gideon stood transfixed by the delicate fabric, an ivory lace dress shimmering in his grasp. A closeted desire, a secret kept for years, threatened to unravel as he held the garment in his childhood bedroom. It was the dress his mother had received from his father, a surprise gift for their 20th anniversary. Gideon, a skilled graphic designer living away from home, found himself drawn to this garment, an escape from the constraints of his performed masculinity. At 26, he had mastered the art of pretense during his rare visits, the sports discussions, the manual labor, all a carefully curated facade. As he gazed at the dress, a whispered promise escaped his lips. Just this once. From his overnight bag, he retrieved the small makeup kit he kept hidden in a toiletry case. He'd gotten better at application over the years, the early days of smudged eyeliner and clownish blush long behind him. The transformation began slowly. Foundation to soften the angles of his face, subtle contouring to create delicate cheekbones, mascara to lengthen his already long lashes, a soft pink lipstick that complemented his fair skin. From another hidden compartment in his bag, he withdrew the blonde wig, high-quality human hair that had cost him 3 months' worth of savings. He positioned it carefully, adjusting until the golden waves framed his face just right, falling past his shoulders in a way his own short brown hair never could. The dress was the final piece. He stepped into it carefully, pulling it up over his slim frame. Years of avoiding his father's invitations to work out had left him without the broad shoulders that might have made this moment impossible. The dress zipped up easily, the ivory lace hugging his waist before flaring out gently to his knees. Standing before the mirror, Gideon felt his breath catch. The person staring back wasn't the awkward, perpetually uncomfortable man his parents knew. Instead, he saw someone serene, authentic, someone he'd come to know in private moments stolen in his apartment, in anonymous online forums, in dreams that left him both hopeful and terrified upon waking.
Gia,
he whispered, trying out the name he'd chosen for himself in those private moments.
Gia.
Time slipped away as he moved around the room, enjoying the feeling of the dress swishing against his legs. He found his mother's pearl earrings on her dresser and clipped them on, completing the outfit. The weight of them against his earlobes felt right, grounding. Lost in this rare moment of freedom, he didn't hear the front door open, didn't register the heavy footsteps on the stairs. It wasn't until the bedroom door swung open that reality came crashing back.
Patricia, did you forget?
His father's voice cut off abruptly. Howard Maxwell stood frozen in the doorway, his face draining of color as he took in the sight before him. His son, dressed in his wife's anniversary dress, wearing makeup, earrings, and a blonde wig. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating.
Dad,
Gideon finally managed, his voice barely audible.
I can explain.
Howard's face transformed, shock giving way to something darker.
What the hell is this?
He demanded, his voice rising with each word.
What are you doing in your mother's clothes?
Gideon's hands flew to the wig, an instinctive gesture to hide, to remove the evidence, but it was too late. Everything was too late.
I was just... You were just what?
Howard took a step into the room.
Playing dress-up? Is this some kind of sick joke?
No, it's not.
Take it off.
Howard's voice was cold, controlled in a way that was more frightening than if he'd been shouting.
Take all of it off right now.
Gideon stood paralyzed, the shame he'd anticipated mixing with an unexpected surge of defiance. For years, he'd hidden this part of himself, tucked it away in dark corners where no one could see. But standing there, even as his father's disgust became palpable, something inside him refused to apologize for existing.
I can't keep pretending,
he said, his voice growing stronger.
This is who I am, Dad. I've known for years.
I'm not the son you thought you had. Howard's face contorted.
What are you saying? That you're some kind of...
He couldn't seem to finish the sentence.
I'm transgender,
Gideon said, the words both terrifying and liberating. I've been hiding it, trying to be what you and Mom wanted, but I can't anymore. I'm a woman. I've always been a woman inside. The confession hung in the air between them, irretrievable. Howard stepped back, as if physically struck.
Get out,
he said, his voice low.
Dad, please.
Get out! The shout seemed to shake the walls.
Pack your things and get out of my house. I won't have this perversion under my roof.
Howard! Patricia's voice called from downstairs. Is everything okay? The restaurant gave me food poisoning. We had to come back early. Footsteps on the stairs again, lighter this time. Neither man moved as Patricia appeared behind Howard, her eyes widening as she took in the scene.
Gideon?
She whispered, confusion and shock battling across her features. What are you wearing? Is that my...
He's leaving,
Howard cut in, his voice brooking no argument.
He's packing his things and leaving right now.
But it's nearly midnight, Patricia protested, looking between her husband and child in bewilderment. I don't care what time it is. I want him gone. Gideon stood rooted to the spot, the beautiful moment from earlier shattered beyond recognition. His mother's eyes held questions he wasn't ready to answer, his father's contained rejection he'd always feared.
Fine,
he said finally, his voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I'll go. The next hour passed in a blur of motion, removing the dress, the makeup, the wig, packing his things while his father stood in the doorway, as if afraid to leave him alone in the house. His mother's confused attempts at intervention, silenced each time by Howard's curt responses. And then he was outside, the cold December air biting through his thin jacket as he loaded his overnight bag into his car. The house that had once been his home now loomed behind him, windows lit but no longer welcoming. As he pulled away from the curb, he caught a glimpse of his mother in the doorway, one hand raised in a hesitant goodbye. His father was nowhere to be seen. 3 years. 3 years of silence stretched between that night and the envelope that now sat on Gia's kitchen counter, the Maxwell family crest embossed on heavy cream paper. Inside, an invitation to Christmas dinner, written in her mother's familiar handwriting, but signed by both parents. Gia ran her fingers over the ink, tracing the letters of her dead name that her mother had crossed out, replacing it with Gia in careful print. A small gesture that spoke volumes. The transition had not been easy. After that night, she had returned to her apartment and fallen apart, the carefully constructed walls she'd built around herself, crumbling completely. But from that rubble, she had slowly, painfully begun to build something new, something authentic. Hormone therapy had softened her features, redistributed weight to give her the curves she'd always felt should be there. Her naturally blonde hair, once kept short to please her father, now hung past her shoulders in soft waves. Voice training had lifted her pitch to a range that felt right, that didn't cause a jolt of dysphoria every time she spoke. There had been losses along the way, friends who couldn't understand. A promotion passed over when her company claimed restructuring, but coincidentally timed with her transition. Dating had become a minefield of rejection and occasionally dangerous reactions. But there had been unexpected allies, too. Her childhood friend Marcus, who'd simply said, "About time you figured it out," and then asked what name she preferred. Her elderly neighbor Mrs. Chen, who left care packages outside her door during recovery from gender-affirming surgeries. New friends in the trans support group who understood the journey in ways others couldn't. And now, this invitation. After 3 years of returned Christmas cards and unanswered phone calls, her parents, or at least her mother, were reaching out. "You don't have to go," Marcus said when she called him, panic rising in her voice. "After what he said to you? You don't owe them anything." "I know," Gia replied, twisting the phone cord around her finger, a nervous habit from childhood she'd never broken. "But what if this is the only chance? What if they're trying?" Marcus sighed, his concern evident even through the phone. "Then go. But on your terms, Gia. Don't let them make you small again." Her terms. The words echoed as she stood in front of her closet the morning of Christmas Eve, deliberating. What did one wear to a reunion that might be either reconciliation or a second rejection? In the end, she chose a burgundy velvet dress, conservative in cut but unmistakably feminine, paired with simple gold jewelry and low heels. Her makeup was subtle, enhancing rather than masking. This was who she was now. There would be no hiding, no pretending. The drive to her parents' house felt both endless and too short. Christmas decorations lined the suburban streets, cheerful lights twinkling against the early evening darkness. Gia gripped the steering wheel tighter as familiar landmarks appeared. The park where she'd played as a child, the high school where she'd felt like an actor in the wrong production, the church her parents still attended every Sunday, and then the house itself, unchanged except for a new coat of paint and flower beds where lawn had once been. Her mother's doing, no doubt. Howard Maxwell had never seen the point of flowers. Gia sat in the car for several long minutes, gathering courage. The porch light flicked on, a signal that they'd noticed her arrival. No turning back now. The walk to the front door seemed to take an eternity. She was aware of her heartbeat, too fast and too loud, of the smoothness of the gift bag handles in her sweating palm, of the exact sound her heels made against the concrete path. Before she could ring the bell, the door swung open. Howard Maxwell stood there, older than she remembered, gray now prominent in his once dark hair. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of 3 years of silence hanging between them. Then, to Gia's astonishment, her father's eyes filled with tears.
"I wasn't sure you'd come,"
he said, his voice rough with emotion.
"I wasn't sure I should,"
Gia replied, her own voice steady despite the trembling that had started in her knees. Howard stepped back, opening the door wider.
"Please come in,"
he said, and then, as if the words had been practiced many times,
"My daughter."
The simple phrase, "my daughter," hit Gia like a physical blow. She had prepared for anger, for awkward politeness, for veiled disapproval. She had not prepared for acceptance.
"Your mother's in the kitchen,"
Howard continued as Gia stepped inside, the familiar scent of cinnamon and pine washing over her.
She's been cooking since dawn. You know how she gets at Christmas.
The normality of it, this conversation they might have had any Christmas before, was disorienting. Gia followed her father through the living room, noting the familiar decorations mixed with new ones. The stockings hung by the fireplace caught her eye. 3 of them, including one with Gia embroidered in golden thread.
We got that made last month,
Howard said, following her gaze.
Patricia insisted, even though we weren't sure you'd... well, we hoped.
The kitchen doorway loomed ahead, warm light and the sounds of cooking spilling out. Gia paused, suddenly overwhelmed. "Before we go in," she said, turning to face her father, "I need to know. What changed? The last time I saw you..."
"The last time I saw you, I was a fool,"
Howard interrupted, his voice low and intense.
"A prideful, ignorant fool who was so concerned with what others might think that I forgot what was important."
He drew a deep breath.
"It took me too long to realize I'd rather have a daughter than no child at all."
The words hung in the air between them, a bridge across the chasm that had separated them for 3 years. "Howard, is she here?" Patricia's voice called from the kitchen, breaking the moment.
"Yes, she's here,"
Howard called back, his eyes never leaving Gia's face. "We're coming." The kitchen was warm and bright, filled with the scents of roasting turkey and fresh bread. Patricia Maxwell stood by the stove, her blonde hair, now with silver strands, pulled back in a neat bun, wearing the Christmas apron Gia had given her years ago. When she turned and saw Gia, she froze, wooden spoon dripping sauce onto the floor. For a terrifying moment, Gia thought she saw confusion in her mother's eyes, as if she was searching for the son she remembered in this woman who stood before her. Then Patricia was moving, crossing the kitchen with arms outstretched. "Gia," she said, the name sounding natural on her lips. "My beautiful girl." The embrace was fierce, desperately tight, as if Patricia feared Gia might disappear again. When they finally pulled apart, both women were crying, mascara smudging despite waterproof claims. "Let me look at you," Patricia said, holding Gia at arm's length. "That dress is gorgeous on you. Burgundy was always your color. You used to steal my burgundy cardigan in high school, remember?" The memory hit Gia with unexpected force. How she had claimed to like the cardigan because it was soft, when in truth, it had been the most feminine item she could get away with wearing. "I remember," she said softly. "You never complained." "I knew," Patricia said simply. "Maybe not everything, not the full truth, but I knew something. A mother knows when her child is hiding." The admission hung in the air, raising questions Gia wasn't sure she was ready to ask. How long had her mother suspected? What conversations had happened during the 3 years of silence? What journey had brought them from that terrible night to this kitchen, with her father using the word daughter and her mother acting as if Gia had always been Gia? As if sensing her thoughts, Howard cleared his throat.
"We have a lot to talk about,"
he said.
"But first, let's have dinner. Your mother's been planning this meal for weeks."
Dinner was surreal. Familiar Christmas dishes passed around a table where conversation carefully avoided the elephant in the room. They spoke of Gia's work, thriving after she'd left her previous company and started her own design firm. Of local news, of Patricia's garden club victories. It was only when dessert was served, pumpkin pie with whipped cream, that Howard finally set down his fork with purpose.
I owe you an apology,
he said, looking directly at Gia.
What I said that night, how I reacted, there's no excuse.
Gia felt her throat tighten. Dad.
Let me finish,
Howard insisted.
For months after you left, I told myself I was right, that it was some phase or confusion. I was angry that you'd spring something like that on us, as if you'd done it to hurt us deliberately.
He shook his head.
I was wrong, on all counts.
Patricia reached over to take her husband's hand, a gesture of support that spoke of many difficult conversations.
What changed?
Gia asked, the question that had been burning inside her all evening. Howard exchanged a glance with Patricia.
Many things. Small things that added up. Your mother, for one. She never stopped defending you. Never stopped leaving your place at the table empty every holiday as a reminder.
The church, oddly enough, Patricia added. We switched to the one downtown last year, and the pastor there has a transgender daughter. He spoke about it during a sermon, about how God doesn't make mistakes, just different paths.
But mostly,
Howard continued,
it was the letter.
Letter?
Gia frowned.
I never sent a letter.
Not to us,
Patricia explained. To your cousin Rebecca. You wrote to her last year, explaining everything. She shared it with us, thought it might help us understand. Gia remembered the letter, a desperate attempt to maintain at least one family connection after her father's birthday card had been returned unopened. She'd poured her heart out to Rebecca, explaining the years of dysphoria, the painful journey of self-discovery, the medical realities of transition.
That letter,
Howard said, his voice rough with emotion,
made me realize this wasn't a choice you made lightly.
That you'd been suffering for years while I was busy planning fishing trips and worrying about whether you'd take over the family business someday.
He looked down at his hands.
I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, really see you.
The words hung in the air, years of pain and misunderstanding distilled into a single, sincere apology. Gia felt tears welling again, but these were different from the tears of fear and anticipation she'd shed in the car.
I didn't know if you'd ever want to see me again, she admitted. After a while, I stopped hoping.
That's on us, Patricia said firmly. We should have reached out sooner, but we weren't sure you'd forgive us. Forgive your father after what happened.
It hasn't been easy, Gia acknowledged.
There were days I was so angry I couldn't see straight. Days I wanted to call just to yell at you both. She took a deep breath.
But mostly, I missed you. Even when I was furious, I missed you.
Howard nodded, understanding in his eyes.
We've missed you too. More than words can say.
Patricia squeezed her husband's hand before releasing it to reach for Gia's. We want to be part of your life again, if you'll let us. We know we have a lot to learn and we'll make mistakes, but we want to try. The sincerity in her mother's voice was unmistakable. Gia looked between her parents, seeing not the rejection she'd feared, but two people who, despite their flaws and mistakes, were trying to bridge the gap they'd created. I'd like that, she said softly. But I need you to understand. This is who I am. I'm not going through a phase. I'm not confused. I'm Gia.
We know,
Howard said firmly.
And we're proud of the woman you've become. It took courage to be true to yourself, especially knowing how I might react.
The acknowledgement, simple yet profound, washed over Gia like a wave, carrying away years of doubt and fear. After dinner, they moved to the living room, the conversation growing easier as the evening progressed. Patricia brought out photo albums, pointing out moments from Gia's childhood that now made sense in retrospect. Her fascination with her mother's jewelry, her discomfort in team sports, the Halloween when she'd begged to be a princess instead of a knight. "I should have known then," Patricia mused, looking at the photo of a sullen child in knight costume. "You were so upset about that costume." "You couldn't have known," Gia assured her. "I didn't even understand it myself back then." As the clock neared midnight, Howard excused himself briefly, returning with 3 small glasses and a bottle of aged whiskey, a Maxwell family tradition for special occasions.
"I think this qualifies,"
he said, pouring a finger of amber liquid into each glass. He handed them around, then raised his own.
"To new beginnings, and to my daughter, Gia, the bravest Maxwell I know."
The toast brought fresh tears to Gia's eyes. She raised her glass in return.
"To family," she said simply.
Later, as she prepared to leave, declining the offer to stay overnight with a promise to return for Christmas dinner the next day, Howard walked her to the door.
"I have something for you,"
he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small velvet box, well worn around the edges.
"This belonged to your grandmother. She always said it should go to her granddaughter."
Gia opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside lay a delicate gold locket, oval-shaped with intricate engravings. "Dad," she whispered, the word catching in her throat.
"She would have been proud of you,"
Howard said quietly.
"She valued authenticity above all else. Used to say pretending to be someone you're not was the gravest sin against yourself."
Gia lifted the locket from its velvet nest, turning it over in her palm. "Will you help me put it on?" Howard nodded, taking the necklace and moving behind her. His fingers, once so capable with fishing line and power tools, fumbled slightly with the delicate clasp.
"There,"
he said, as the locket settled against her collarbone.
"It suits you."
Gia touched the locket, feeling its weight. Not just the physical weight of gold, but the weight of acceptance it represented. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for everything she felt. Howard nodded, understanding in his eyes.
"Drive safely. Text your mother when you get home so she doesn't worry."
The normalcy of the request, the parental concern unchanged despite everything else that had changed, brought a smile to Gia's face. "I will." Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars visible above, despite the glow of Christmas lights from neighboring houses. Gia paused on the front step, looking back at her father silhouetted in the doorway. "Dad?" she called softly.
"I'm glad I came."
Howard's smile was visible even in the dim porch light.
"So am I, sweetheart. So am I."
As she drove away, Gia felt the weight of the past 3 years lifting. The road ahead would not be perfect. There would be awkward questions, mistakes, moments of tension as they all navigated this new reality. But for the first time since that terrible night, she felt hope blooming in her chest. Fragile but persistent. The burgundy dress she wore symbolized not just her identity, but a bridge between past and present, between who she had pretended to be and who she truly was. In its rich folds lay the promise of future family gatherings, of difficult but necessary conversations, of building relationships based on truth rather than expectations. At a red light, she caught sight of herself in the rearview mirror. blonde hair framing a face that finally felt like her own. Her grandmother's locket glinting at her throat. The woman who looked back at her was no longer hiding, no longer afraid.
Gia Maxwell,
she whispered to her reflection as the light turned green, propelling her forward into a future suddenly rich with possibility.
Merry Christmas.
The next morning, Christmas Day, Gia woke to the sound of her phone chiming with a text message. Squinting against the early morning light, she reached for the device on her nightstand.
Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Dad's making his famous pancakes. Come hungry. Love, Mom.
Such a simple message, yet it brought tears to her eyes. How many Christmas mornings had she woken to similar texts before everything fell apart? The familiar tradition, now resumed as if the intervening years had been merely a brief interruption rather than a chasm, touched something deep within her. She texted back quickly.
Merry Christmas! Save me the blueberry ones. I'll be there by 10.
Rising from bed, Gia moved to her closet, considering her options for the day. Christmas at the Maxwell house had always been casual, comfortable clothes for opening presents, changing into something nicer for dinner later. After some deliberation, she selected a soft emerald green sweater dress that complemented her blonde hair and the locket that now felt like a talisman around her neck. The drive to her parents' house was easier in daylight, the familiar route bringing back memories of countless trips home for holidays, weekends, or just impromptu visits when she'd lived closer. Before she'd begun transitioning, before the years of estrangement, before everything changed. This time when she arrived, her father was waiting at the door, wearing the ridiculous Santa apron that had been a family joke for as long as she could remember.
Right on time,
he called as she made her way up the path. Pancakes are just about ready. Inside, the house smelled of coffee, maple syrup, and pine from the Christmas tree in the corner of the living room. Patricia was setting the table, humming along to Christmas carols, playing softly in the background.
There you are,
she said warmly, pulling Gia into a hug. Sleep well?
Better than I have in years,
Gia admitted. It was true. The weight of family rejection had haunted her sleep for so long that its absence felt almost disorienting. Breakfast was a revelation. Howard's pancakes were exactly as Gia remembered, complete with the slightly burned edges he never could seem to avoid. The conversation flowed more easily than the night before, as if they had collectively decided to move forward rather than dwell on the painful past. We have something to tell you, Patricia said as they were finishing. She glanced at Howard, who nodded encouragingly. We've been seeing a therapist, both together and separately, to help us understand better, to be better parents to you. Gia set down her coffee cup slowly. You have? Howard nodded, a trace of his old discomfort visible but overridden by determination. Dr. Wilson specializes in helping families with transgender members. She's been educational.
That's actually amazing,
Gia said, genuinely surprised. Her father had always dismissed therapy as paying someone to tell you what you already know.
We've also joined a support group for parents, Patricia added. PFLAG meetings twice a month at the community center. There are more families like ours than we realized.
The effort they were making, concrete steps, not just empty words, touched Gia deeply. Thank you, she said simply. That means a lot. After breakfast came the tradition of present opening. Gia had brought gifts purchased hastily after receiving the invitation, a leather wallet for her father to replace the tattered one he'd carried for decades, and a cashmere scarf in her mother's favorite shade of blue. What she hadn't expected was the pile of packages waiting for her under the tree.
These aren't just from this year,
Patricia explained as Howard began distributing them.
We bought you presents every Christmas, every birthday, just in case.
Just in case. The words hung in the air, an admission that even during the silence, they had hoped for reconciliation. The gifts reflected a journey of understanding. The earliest, from the Christmas just after their estrangement, contained a neutral sweater and books, safe choices that betrayed uncertainty, but those from more recent years showed growing awareness. A delicate silk scarf, a beautiful leather purse, a pair of gold earrings that matched the locket Howard had given her.
How did you know my size?
Gia asked, holding up a cashmere sweater dress in exactly the right dimensions. Patricia smiled ruefully. Rebecca, she's been our spy. She showed us your social media when we were too afraid to reach out directly. The thought of her parents carefully studying her Instagram photos, trying to understand her new life from a distance, brought a lump to Gia's throat.
I have one more thing for you,
Howard said, reaching behind the tree for a flat, rectangular package wrapped in silver paper.
This is, well, you'll see.
Gia unwrapped it carefully to reveal a framed document, her birth certificate, but not the original. This was a new one, with Gia Elizabeth Maxwell clearly printed under name and female under sex. How did you get this? She whispered, running her fingers over the glass. We hired a lawyer to help with the paperwork, Howard explained. Rebecca told us you'd been putting it off because of the expense and complexity. The gesture went beyond acceptance into active support, practical, tangible validation of her identity. Gia looked up at her father, seeing in his eyes not just tolerance, but pride. Thank you, she said, the words wholly inadequate for what she felt. The rest of the day passed in a blur of Christmas traditions resumed, watching holiday movies while Patricia prepared dinner, Howard insisting on carving the turkey with unnecessary ceremony, crackers pulled with theatrical enthusiasm to reveal paper crowns that everyone wore without complaint. As evening approached, Gia helped her mother with the dishes, a comfortable silence between them as they worked side by side. I always wanted a daughter to cook with, Patricia said suddenly, passing Gia a plate to dry. I used to try to get you interested when you were younger, but you were so resistant. Now, I understand why. Gia nodded, remembering how cooking with her mother had felt simultaneously appealing and painful, desirable because it was a traditionally feminine activity, terrifying because embracing it felt like revealing too much of herself. I'd like to learn now, she said. If the offer still stands. Patricia's smile was radiant. I'd love that. Later, as they sat in the living room, the Christmas tree lights casting a warm glow over everything, Howard cleared his throat, a sound Gia recognized from childhood as preceding something important.
Your mother and I have been talking,
he began,
about the house.
It's too big for just the two of us these days.
Gia tensed, wondering where this was going.
We're thinking of moving closer to the city,
Patricia continued.
Closer to you, if that wouldn't be intruding too much on your life.
The offer behind the statement was clear. They wanted to be present, to make up for lost time, to rebuild what had been broken. I'd like that, Gia said honestly. I've missed having you nearby. Howard nodded, satisfied. Good. That's good. As the evening drew to a close, Gia found herself reluctant to leave, even though she had work the following day and a long drive back to her apartment. Stay the night, Patricia urged. Your room is always ready. Her room. Not Gideon's room, but hers. Gia's. The distinction was subtle but significant. I really should get back, she said regretfully. But I could come for dinner next weekend?
We'd love that,
Howard said.
And maybe bring that friend of yours. Marcus? Your mother wants to thank him properly for looking after you when we failed.
The acknowledgement of their failure, spoken plainly rather than couched in excuses, was perhaps the most healing part of the entire reconciliation. As she prepared to leave, gathering her gifts and new birth certificate, Gia found herself lingering in the hallway by the family photos. Most were old, school portraits and family vacations from before. But there, in a new frame at the end of the row, was something unexpected, a professional photograph of Gia that had been taken for her design firm's website, showing her smiling confidently in her burgundy dress, blonde hair framing her face. When did you get this? She asked, touching the frame gently. Last month, Patricia admitted. From your website. We wanted you here, even if you decided not to come. The simple gesture, including her present self among the family memories, moved Gia deeply. At the door, goodbyes were different from the night before. Less tentative, more certain of another meeting soon. Howard hugged her tightly, whispering, I'm so proud of you, Gia, while Patricia fussed about taking leftovers and driving carefully. As Gia drove away, the Christmas lights of her childhood home growing smaller in the rearview mirror, she felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a circle closing, making way for new beginnings. The burgundy dress she'd worn the previous night hung in her closet at home. As Gia drove towards the new chapter of her life, the emerald dress shimmered, embodying the color of renewal, a fitting choice for this personal revival. The traffic lights, in their own symbolic fashion, heralded the go-ahead for a life replete with rediscovered connections, now rewoven into a richer, more complex but ultimately healthier tapestry. Gia felt the locket around her throat, the cherished symbol of a truer and deeper past, from which she had emerged stronger and freer. It was with deep assurance and the visceral thrill of speed that she realized with every mile she was now on a road leading home.
Thanks for watching, my girlies! Be sure to check out Patreon for more!